the speed with which the party has dealt with it, the speed the government took the whip away, has removed Andrew Gwynn as a minister, which is, I think, unfortunately the right sanction. It had to be that way. I disagree slightly. I think there was this pledge to be better and to do things differently, and actually you've seen the Prime Minister do just that this occasion. It's disappointing that not everyone in the people in the party needed to hear the message again, but I think they've heard it.
Something that no one seems to be talking about with this as well, though, is that from a health perspective, with Andrew Gwynn as the health minister, he has had 7 months where he has been meeting with charities, various sectors within health. He has a role to play within the health and social care area. You're now going to have charities, organisations up and down the country incredibly frustrated because they have been briefing Andrew, making sure that he knows everything he needs to know about the state of affairs, just to have to start again. And that is so frustrating for those working in that health space. So any minister that has the responsibility of not just upholding public office and representing their constituents, they also have a brief and a portfolio that they need to be across, and they need to behave as impeccably as possible to make sure that they hold that brief, because they are holding the nation's health in their hands.
I think there is a question about standards here, though, because, you use the phrase impeccable. Nobody can be perfect, nobody can be impeccable. And I think part of Iain's question and indeed George's question was about whether you can cut people in public life some slack. And we've seen a lot of people in public life suffering as a consequence of people holding them to standards that cannot be met. The question is, where do you draw the line? And, as I say, there's an investigation. Philip's just talked about anti-Semitic remarks and what that actually means, and whether the intention of this language was meant to be public or not. Is this a question of pressure and somebody not being able to deal with the pressure and then just trying to let off some steam? One would argue whether this is the right way to do it or whether this is a sensible way to do it. But it does force us to ask ourselves questions about what sort of standards are we asking people to uphold, and are they realistic? And that's kind of what comes down the track, depending on what Andrew Gwynn's defence is going to be as well. I'm sort of less concerned with the way that the Prime Minister's acted in relation to this, because, of course, withdrawing the whip and his investigation continuing is the right thing to happen. But the wider question for me is, what are standards and what are our expectations for people in public life?
I think it's interesting that Oliver Ryan, this 29-year-old MP for Burnley, who's gay himself, is accused of being homophobic. I mean, because I read the comments that he had made, and I wasn't offended by them. Sometimes I just think people are looking to be offended.
I don't know about that. I think we asked rightly, what are the standards we should expect? I think we expect above this standard for sure, and the coarseness of conversation about protected characteristic minorities, about their own constituents, about the people, the public that they serve, does not suggest the right intention, the right gravity to the public that is being served. And I think that's disappointing, but it's right that the government has taken quick and swift action.
If the Standards Committee finds that he didn't do anything wrong, let's just say that as an assumption, would we be happy to see him back in public life?
Well, he is in public life.
But I mean, in terms of front bench and in terms of the prominent position in public life.
See, I think Andrew Gwynn, his career is over. Oliver Ryan, I don't think so. I think he can work his passage back, but I don't think there's any. And then Jerome, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. So I'm trying to leave the political party side out of it just for a moment for this conversation. And Salma, you're right. I mean, we're not perfect. We say stupid things. We particularly often say stupid things to friends where we think we're in a private environment. And somebody leaked this. One of his friends leaked it, and with friends like that, who needs enemies, frankly? But then there comes a point where you say, actually, this is just not right, what you said. And if I'd like to think that if I'd been on that WhatsApp group, I'd have picked it up and said no. So, yeah.
Have you ever seen that? I mean, I'm not asking you to breach any confidences here, but have either of you ever seen that in your own WhatsApp groups where somebody has said something either outrageous or insulting, and then another MP has come back and said, hang on a second.
Yes. Yes,
You have
this happens.
Who was it?
It's around. It tends to be around policy type decisions or suggestions, and you go, no, that's going too far, or you haven't thought this through properly. But yeah, I think we're so alive now in modern political life that we keep on reminding ourselves that whatever you put in a WhatsApp group, you've got to expect to be on the front page of the newspaper. And if you don't want to read it in the front page of the newspaper, you should not be writing it.
Well, shall I read out a WhatsApp message that's come in while we've been talking? Because I think it does actually, in some ways, sum it up. From Steve, who in Manchester, who says, Iain, you're conflating morals with professionalism. Did he really mean it all? Is he morally bankrupt? Almost certainly not. Was it unprofessional to a major degree? Yes, absolutely. He was a government minister. Professionalism is on the side of the tin. He blew it. And that kind of sums it up, doesn't it? Really?
I think that's right, yeah.
In which case, we can go to a break and we'll answer more questions in just a moment. It's 8:15.
This is LBC.
This
Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
We have with us Phil Rosenberg, President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Now, just tell us about that role, because you look far too young to be a president.
Well, I'm the youngest ever president.
Are you?
The board was founded in 1760,
Wow.
a little bit before the United States of America. And we comprise 200 member organisations from Cornwall to Aberdeen, synagogues, charities across the country, with 300 deputies that meet as a sort of Jewish parliament.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds a bit like that, Parliament.
It's a bit like that, and every 3 years they elect a president, and back in May they elected me.
What do you do?
We represent the UK Jewish
No, but
community.
what do you do?
As president?
Yeah.
We represent the UK Jewish community to government, media, different faith communities and the diplomatic corps. So advocating for the UK Jewish community.
Good stuff. We have also Salma Shah, political commentator. Does it annoy you now that your former life as a special advisor, we always introduce you as that, or...?
No, because I have a post life in business, but actually it's my former life is still the most relevant when it comes to discussing these things, because surprisingly, even though I left government 5.5 years ago, near enough, every single issue that comes up is just a recycle of that, which I find quite frustrating, but it's very important to say, actually, no, we thought about this already at the time.
Jess Brown-Fuller is with us, Liberal Democrat MP for Chichester, the party's health spokesperson, or one of them. Are you the main one?
I'm not the main
You're
one.
not?
No, I
One day,
confess.
Jess, one day.
One day, big aspirations. Maybe if Helen Morgan says something awful in WhatsApp, I'll get my shot.
Shopper.
See, that's quite... You see that?
That's an
You see, in
incentive.
5 years' time, it'll be drummed out of you to say that you can't say things like that. Jerome Mayhew is Conservative Shadow Transport Minister and MP for Broadland and Fakenham, and has a very famous father, don't you?
I do, yes. So he was Patrick Mayhew, who formerly of this parish, and some people may remember him as Northern Ireland Secretary during the peace process.
And used to be my MP. In fact, there must be something about me and the Mayhew family, given that I've now had two of you representing me.
I hope that's been a good experience for you both times.
Perfect. Right, let's do a WhatsApp. Was that convincing? Let's do a WhatsApp question from Carolina in Essex. Have Trump's recent comments on Gaza influenced Hamas's decision to suspend the release of hostages and jeopardise the ceasefire agreement? Now, just a bit of background to this. Hamas has suspended the next swap of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners, which was due to take place on Saturday, after accusing the Israeli government of breaching the conditions of the ceasefire linked to letting refugees return to their homes and to letting aid into Gaza. Phil, I'll let you ask the first question last because you're a newbie, but you can go first on this one.
I think it's just heartbreaking. I mean, the families, the hostages who are in, we don't know what conditions, but we saw the conditions. The ones released last week were in emaciated, starved, tortured. We were hoping more would come out. We were hoping that for them, their families. And Hamas has reminded us what it is, which is a cruel, sadistic terrorist organisation that started an appalling war, took hostages, used its own people as human shields, and is now, again, playing with people's lives rather than trying to push forward that slim, tenuous, slender hope of a ceasefire that could be extended and to move to a better future for Israelis and Palestinians. But once again, Hamas shows no interest in that.
There has been a suggestion that maybe one reason behind this is because of the condition of the remaining hostages. I mean, obviously, one hopes that isn't what it is, but the ones that were released this weekend, I think there was a lot of comment that they didn't appear in particularly brilliant health.
Yes, and some of the things they've been saying about the people that they were held with suggest that they have been shackled for the best part of 500 days, fed very, very sparingly, if at all at times. And there is a bit of a fear that actually they let the healthiest ones out first, and suddenly they thought, and they were celebrating. I mean, they taunted one of them to say that he was looking forward to seeing his wife and daughter, knowing that Hamas had murdered them. So there's a bit of a fear that they've now realised that the world will not stand for the injustice of what they've done to these very poor people, and they're stepping back and trying to calculate their next move. But once again, they're playing with people's lives, not just the lives of the hostages or Israelis, but Palestinians as well, who clearly want to break out of this cycle of conflict.
Jess?
I don't think I can say it any better than Phil has, to be honest. I mean, I think we all knew this was a very fragile ceasefire, and this is the first sign that Hamas are reneging on their commitments.
But they're accusing Israel of doing that.
Absolutely, and I can recognise that. And I think at the core of it, we're talking about people that are scared of the war beginning again, and of the bombing continuing, and of their homes being further shattered, of people being displaced further, and not getting those hostages home. So at the core of this argument, it's the people that are affected by Hamas and by the Israeli government, and they need to find a way of coming together to get a lasting ceasefire, because these fragile ceasefires are not doing anybody any favours on any side.
What do you think Donald Trump's comments on Gaza have, or what impact have they had on this, if any?
I think they must have had an impact on it, because everything he's been saying is utter lunacy. He's talking about displacing 2.2 million people, removing them from their homes, taking away their right to return, saying you can just go to Egypt, you can just go to Jordan, and I'll build Trump Towers 2.0 on the Gaza Riviera. It's absolutely ludicrous. And I think we need to take note that Trump is volatile, and he will say these things, and he can't do that. He can't even suggest. It's wild to suggest that he can take control of Gaza and build a Riviera and take the home of 2.2 million Palestinians away.
Jerome?
So just dealing with the ceasefire first, and then I might come on to Donald Trump as well. The ceasefire is the only tentative bit of good news in the whole region. It's obviously very unstable, and it's the one thing that needs to be protected, because without that we have nothing. The community on both sides of the argument have nothing. And central to the ceasefire is the release of hostages. So we need to do everything we can to get the hostage releases back on track. And I hear what Phil says about the emaciated condition of the hostages which have been released, particularly the most recently released. And I'd be deeply, deeply concerned if this is something where the optics of it are so bad now that Hamas are reconsidering it. As for President Trump, well, of course, he can say what he wants because he does, and he's president of the United States. What I would say about him is that he quite often says some outlandish things, and that provokes actors to change their position and probably give him what he wants in the first place. So he's quite a robust negotiator, I think. It's an uncontroversial statement. But if you look at his modus operandi previously, he will come out with something which people go, oh, and as you say, clutch their pearls. But it forces negotiation, forces people to move from what were previously red lines. And it has, in fact, been quite effective at getting the job done.
Salma.
It's difficult because the stuff that comes out from the US and sort of the briefing around the White House can be quite confusing in certain instances. Did President Trump's recent comments on Gaza influence Hamas's decision? That's the question. We don't know how Hamas is thinking about this. Is it a question of the condition of the hostages? Is it because they've decided that they feel that their leverage has weakened in this negotiation because of what Trump said? We can only guess at it. What we do know is that in any precarious situation like this, adding a new dynamic and a new potential outcome in a very fragile situation is not a good thing to do. And there are reports that came out that after President Trump's comments, there was a lot of consternation around him in his own team because that was off script. And the reason you do have politicians that are on script is precisely for this reason, because you now have difficulty with other actors in the Middle East, notably Saudi Arabia, who is a big player in this space, it has big influence, is now trying to push back against President Trump's comments as well. So it has not helped an already awful situation. And I think we do need to recognise that, because we talk about Trump as this great deal maker. It's not the same thing when you are dealing with state powers, and we shouldn't categorise potential business success in the same way as these types of negotiations. They're completely different entities.
Regardless of what Donald Trump said, responsibility for this situation lies with Hamas. And I don't think we should, take away from them the fact that they're now deciding whether to release these hostages or not release these hostages. The whole situation was a terrible situation created by them. President Trump, I think you put it very well. Look, fresh thinking is needed in a region where things are stuck. But, we want to see solutions that lead to that are workable and in line with international law. I'm not against the idea of a Gaza Riviera if Palestinians can be there to enjoy it. I think, let's aspire to a better future for Palestinians and for Israelis. But at the end of the day, what we can't take away from is Hamas's responsibility for this whole sick and twisted situation. And what we need to see now is maximum pressure on Hamas and their Iranian backers.
I don't think anybody would argue with that. I think the question here is he making a bad situation worse? And are those comments well thought through? And if we are talking about the release of hostages, the last thing you want to do is give any terrorists an excuse to renege on the deal that is there, or any room to manoeuvre on reneging on the deal. We need to see an end to this and a resolution that brings peace. And we can't do that if one of the critical actors is going off script and creating more new workarounds. And I think that is the worry for me.
I think that we're in a bit of a stuck situation, and it's difficult to tell. People have to be responsible with their words. What I majorly say, though, is that Hamas is ultimately responsible for this situation, and I don't want to too much take away from that, because the whole totality of this sick, twisted theatre is Hamas's responsibility.
What about the accusation from Hamas that Israel is trying to stop Palestinians returning to Gaza? Now, the TV pictures show a lot of people returning to Gaza. So does anyone have any views or information on that?
Well, these seem to be very unspecified comments. You imagine if Hamas really had things to say, they would give specific examples. Israel has withdrawn from much of Gaza as in line with its responsibilities. It withdrew, I think yesterday, from the Netzarim corridor, which was its commitment under the ceasefire agreement. I don't know every jot and tittle of it, but it seems that Israel is abiding by very difficult terms. You know, they're releasing terrorists, people with life sentences, multiple life sentences for terrorism, releasing them in favour of civilians in many cases. And that just tells you what we're dealing with, this asymmetric war between a terrorist organisation and a country that is ultimately trying to defend its people.
Michael says, you lot on LBC, there's nothing you lot can do to aid the hostages. You're pumping up the rhetoric. No one listens to you lot anymore. 3.5 million every week, by the way. You're the ones that caused all these issues. Okay. In the Middle East, the 1948 Balfour Agreement, 1917, you lot are just a disgrace. Armchair weakness from you all. Thank you for that insight, Michael. 4 mistakes in a 5-line WhatsApp message. Andrew Goon will be proud. It's coming up to 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
Hamas says it won't release the next group of Israeli hostages on Saturday. They postponed the handover indefinitely, saying Israel isn't complying with some conditions of the ceasefire. Labour have suspended MP Oliver Ryan over some WhatsApp messages just months after he was elected for the first time. It means he now represents Burnley as an independent. An NHS trust has apologised to the families of 3 babies who died within days of their birth in 2021. Nottingham University Hospitals has admitted failing to provide them with safe care and treatment. LBC weather staying cloudy tonight with rain, sleet and snow in central and eastern parts and a low of 1 degree.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:32. Thanks to Marshall's dad for a very nice WhatsApp message. See, we get very nice ones on this show, not the horrible ones. We'll leave that to other people. With us on the panel, Phil Rosenberg, President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, Jerome Mayhew, Conservative MP for Broadland and Fakenham, Jess Brown-Fuller, Liberal Democrat MP for Chichester, and Salma Shah, political commentator. Right, let's go to a WhatsApp question from the famous Robbie in Chelmsford. Is it possible for Labour to beat reform on their home turf with anti-migrant propaganda, or will they amplify Farage's message for him? Jess, let's start with you.
Oh, you're coming to me first for everything today.
No, I haven't. The last time I did them. Anyway, just a little bit of background for that. More than 500 people who were working in the UK illegally were arrested last month as part of a Home Office crackdown. This is, according to some people, a bad thing.
What, arresting people that were working illegally?
Illegal, yeah.
Okay. So I guess the question that Robbie is asking is it possible for Labour to beat reform on their home turf with anti-migrant propaganda, as Robbie calls it? I think that nobody on this panel will disagree that we need to do something to tackle the dangerous channel crossings. Nobody is going to disagree with that. With regards to migration as a whole, I think that Labour are scared of reform. I think the Conservatives are scared of reform. And I think migration has become a political football when actually it doesn't need to be. We need to talk about how we tackle all of those things separately, because when we talk about migration, we are talking about 4 different things. We're talking about illegal boat crossings where people are putting their lives at risk crossing the channel. We are talking about migration, people coming into this country on visas, working, going to university, and we are talking about asylum seekers, refugees and asylum seekers. So are Labour running scared? I think so, probably. There's no Labour MP here to confirm it, but Phil can probably confirm, being from that world, that yes, they are running scared, but I think so are the Conservatives.
Jerome.
I don't know, is the answer in relation to reform. I don't want to see migration as being, is it reform, is it Labour, or is it Conservative as a policy, or even the Lib Dems, although then we can count that one out. But
We've got very clear. We can discuss them if you'd like.
What I do want to say, though, is that I was delivering leaflets on Saturday in my constituency, knocking on doors, as I do all too often in the wet and the cold. And just as it was in the general election, the single biggest issue on my doorsteps, time and time again, is migration, whether it's illegal migration or net legal
Which is
migration.
bizarre, because knowing your constituency as I do, shall we say it's not a constituency that is full of immigrants?
It's 98.5% white British,
Yeah, that's
but
right,
it is absolutely
Jerome,
the
sorry,
number
can
one
I
political
ask,
issue.
when people ask you about migration on the doorstep, what's the specific thing that they are worried about? Is there kind of something that comes up? Because I hear this all the time from politicians, and I don't mean to say this in an aggressive way, but what are the particular things that they're actually worried about when your constituents talk to you about it?
So first of all, they're not asking me about migration, they're telling me about migration, and they are telling me very forcefully that they see the link between migration, net increase in population leading to pressure on public services, in particular on housing, and also then the knock-ons for other public services. And you can come up with arguments saying, well, lots of the NHS recruitments are international in their background. Well, we should be training our own. We've got a large percentage of our own working age population who are economically inactive. We don't need to have international migration if we take our own long-term NHS workforce plan seriously. And this is a significant concern, a really significant concern. And I think any serious party who has any pretension to government in this country in the next period has to have a credible policy on migration. And just today we've been debating the Borders Bill in Parliament, and it feels like Labour's going the other way. They've removed the deterrent from Rwanda. They've removed the legal basis of that deterrent. So even if they change their mind in the future, they've taken that away, and they've given an incentive, a positive incentive, by having a route for illegal migrants to get to citizenship. They're giving a positive draw incentive. So they're taking away the deterrent, and they're replacing it with a positive incentive for illegal
That's
migration.
assuming that you think it was a deterrent in the first place.
It was. If you don't believe me, which fair enough, ask the Irish, because they were complaining like mad, even before it had been implemented, that migration was directing away from the United Kingdom and going to Dublin, and they were complaining formally about it. And if you don't believe them, go and have a look at all those interviews on the beaches of Calais, where migrants were saying, we're waiting for a Starmer government before we come across.
But surely the deterrent is just having an asylum system that works. So when you were out on the doorsteps on Saturday, were any of your constituents recognising that actually it was the Conservative government that spent 10 years letting the asylum backlog get to the point where it was costing the taxpayer billions of pounds, and not addressing the actual root cause of the problem, and then introducing a Rwanda scheme that cost more money, achieved absolutely nothing, and just sent 4 volunteers?
The answer about Rwanda is that there is no cheap there is no cheap option about how to create a disincentive for people coming over. We have got to fund a proper disincentive. So I make no apologies about the Rwanda scheme. It was already being effective before it was even implemented, and it was a disastrous decision of the Labour government. As soon as they were elected on the 4th of July last year, they cancelled it. Okay. I think we've been paying the price ever since.
So,
well, I think the main ball game is about the economy. I think if the economy improves over the next few years, then that is a way of pushing back against the politics of populist groups. I think obviously improving public services, which the economy helps with. Of course, there have to be incredible efforts to tackle illegal migration. I think clearly that's a concern that comes up, and it has to be done the right way. I sense that I feel that reform is probably a bit overpriced in the long term. Maybe not in the local elections, but in the long term, because I think if the economy does improve, and we see action on some of those areas, reform's current rise is very much tied to Donald Trump's quite exceptional election victory. But actually in 4 years' time, however well he does, he'll have picked up quite a lot of things that make him probably unpopular. And you may see reform's popularity fall alongside him.
I think you're right on that, Phil, but I just want to pick you on one point. It's not populist to care about migration. I think the people as a whole, many millions of people, deeply care about migration. The impact of assimilation or becoming a multicultural society, that is another very significant concern. And just the growth of our population. The ONS came out with a study last week where it forecast another 10 million rise in our population. People don't want that.
But when you're on the doorstep and your constituents ask you about this, what's your response? I mean, do you ever explain to them the benefits of migration?
I think answering the bit of Jess's question or accusation that I skipped rather politically a moment ago, I think we've got to accept where the Conservative Party did make mistakes. I mean, we talked tough on migration, we weren't tough enough in dealing with it in practicalities. And we made some good steps, but we didn't go far enough. And I think what you're seeing under Kemi Badenoch is a recognition, the honesty. The first step is honesty. Then you listen with intent to hear. So, and it's noticeable that the first big policy decision and announcement that Kemi Badenoch and her new team has made has been on migration and the toughening up the route in which you get indefinite leave to remain, and that is a good thing.
Salma.
It's hard not to take that slightly personally as somebody who was in the government responsible for immigration policy.
It's all your fault.
Yeah, it's all my fault, apparently. So there's a couple of things here. One, the link that is made from immigration to pressure on public services is not necessarily the correct one to make. So you've just talked about the fact that your constituency is 99% white British, but they are worried about the pressure on public services. So it doesn't follow that the pressure on public services...
particularly in relation to housing, it really does. And that spreads right across the country.
But then there's a different question there, because lots of migrants that are coming in, not through the illegal routes, but through the legal routes, do not have recourse to NHS services, they do not have recourse to housing, and they do not have recourse to benefits.
They have to live somewhere.
And one of the aspects of Brexit was supposed to be about the end of freedom of movement, and that meant that actually you had fewer migrants coming in. I don't dispute with you at all that migration is an important question that we need to deal with, whether that's illegal or legal migration or economic migration. And I also recognise that actually we can't just say that everybody that's coming in on a small boat is a refugee. Actually, a lot of them are economic migrants who are coming from Albania, not from war-torn places, even though things like the rise in climate change and conflict has created more pressure on movements of migration patterns, right? So we do have to address that. But I feel that politics is going round in the same circles over and over again, but they're not really thinking about what are we actually addressing. Integration is one important part, but there is no policy that is dealing with integration and immigration at this current moment in time. We're all talking about numbers, and realistically, if we keep making that connection between numbers and pressure on public service, what we are not going to do is look for efficiency in the way that our public services are run, and a reckoning about the kinds of public services we have and whether what we do as a state is still correct and whether we can organise it properly.
I don't see the link. I think you can control migration numbers, have a stable population. Doesn't mean to say you can't at the same time have proper reform of the NHS. If you look at and public service generally, I mean, one of the awful figures that came out today, I think, was that productivity in the health service has declined by nearly 20% since 2019.
But then training
over
people
8% by the public sector as a whole.
But you're also saying that we need to train our own people up to go into the NHS. Fine, I don't think anybody disputes that. But if people aren't making an active choice to go into public service, what do you do about that? Do you let it fall over, or do you go and get migrants in order to fill those jobs?
So in a way, surely it is the case that it's the economy that decides how many migrants that we need, and the government can try and put an artificial cap on it, but all the government is doing then is suppressing economic activity.
Iain, yes, and I think Sam makes a very important point about integration, and I think that's a really important thing that I think very few parties have properly gripped. It's really important to do so. I think one of the challenges with the immigration debate is there's been a lot of gimmickry, frankly, rather than sensible politics. I think we were told that Brexit would lead to a decrease in migration. It's actually led to an increase in migration. The Rwanda scheme sent a lot of money to Rwanda, but not many.
So I don't think it is Brexit that's led to an increase in migration.
No,
I think it's the economy and the fact that not enough British people are willing to do jobs that foreign people are.
But also a lack of proper agreements with our European partners.
No, but that's not freedom of movement.
It's certainly not change the equation positively. I mean, we can't say.
No, but we should be clear about this though, because one of the biggest factors that contributed to our rise was our own humanitarian position for Hong Kong, for Ukraine, and for Afghanistan. And I don't think anybody around this table would make an apology for that and the increase that came in the numbers for that. The other aspect of it is student migration, and the OECD says that you have to treat students that come here for over a year as permanent migration. But if they go after 4 and there's a cyclical impact on that, do we need to have a bigger question on that? But the problem is, as you say, Iain, we are focusing on numbers in this artificial way that doesn't actually deal with what we need to do with the economy. Now, it might be that we do need to reduce numbers, but we do need to think about other aspects of pressure on public services. For example, whether our tax money is spent well on public services, does it get the efficiency that it needs, and have we got the reform to tackle some of this stuff?
Iain, can I pick you up on this? Because you can buy economic growth by importing more people into the country, but that doesn't make you feel as an individual any richer. We need to look at GDP per capita, and the way you build that up is through what was the Brexit bargain, which was you can I was a former employer, you can get people in cheap from abroad, and that works for the short term.
Did you?
We did not, as it happens, but one could, and then, or you can say, right, we were artificially pushing down on the value of entry level labour, or you can say this is a scarce resource. The market then reacts, and people get paid more, and that is a good thing. And then you invest in productivity enhancing skills, because if cheap labour isn't as cheap any longer, you look to cut your costs in different ways through productivity. That's what we need to do as an economy.
That has been a consistent policy over the last 10 years. It's one of the reasons the apprenticeship levy was introduced, for example. So I think we have to ask ourselves, if all these things have happened and these discussions have happened, where are we actually getting it wrong? Perhaps in the implementation, perhaps in the spending.
From my mind, it's basic economics. If you reduce the supply of an opportunity, which is cheap labour from abroad, then it increases its value. Then you let the market decide. The market does. You don't need the national living wage or national minimum wage to artificially increase the value of entry-level labour or unskilled labour. It happens naturally, and then it provokes business people like me to invest in productivity enhancing capital investment, and that's exactly what the British economy needs, and I think we should do it.
Salma, you mentioned apprenticeships there, or the apprenticeship levy. On Wednesday at 9 o'clock we have the apprenticeships minister, none other than Jackie Smith, joining us for an hour to take questions. It obviously won't be descending into For the Many type larkery, because she is now a respected government minister. We'll see anyway. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Ask Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:49. Phil Rosenberg, Jerome Mayhew, Jess Brown-Fuller and Salma Shah with us answering your questions. Right, one from Kevin. Is there any sympathy out there for the farmers in central London today, or are they just Extinction Rebellion in tractors? On tractors, I think you'll find is the phrase. Hundreds of tractors were driven through central London today, most of them parked in Whitehall. It was actually quite a sight. I walked along the whole of Whitehall this afternoon, and I'll tell you what, tractors have got a lot bigger than in my day with my Massey Ferguson 135. Honestly, it would look
What's
pathetic.
What's a Massey Ferguson 135? If I Google it, am I going to get into trouble?
What, like Neil Parish did, yeah. Nice bit of tractor porn. Right, Jerome, you have a very agricultural constituency.
I have, and I must be one of the only MPs who's got a tractor driving qualification. So I drove one of our tractors from a family farm in my constituency to Fakenham Racecourse a couple of weeks ago, where they had a rally at the races to show the rural community's support for farmers.
Have you ever won a ploughing competition, though?
I have not.
Wow. Let me tell you.
Have you in?
I have.
Wow. I'm very impressed by that.
Yeah.
But
complete fluke.
Yeah. So it's something which has really ignited people's anger in communities like mine, and they recognise that it is fundamentally unfair, the family farm tax, that the government did not understand the nature of the imposition on the community, because they started by saying, it's only going to be 4% of estates which are going to be affected by this, and when the NFU and others did the work, and it turns out it was actually over 90,000 farms which would be affected, they've just doubled down. So they don't really care about the rural community. They care more about the messaging for their own political aims.
Now, Phil, you did tell me where you lived earlier, and I'm guessing there aren't many pounds to the dozen there.
Not many. We do get the tractors passing through when we in northwest London when they come into town. I think a lot of people will have a lot of sympathy for this, the rural lifestyle, what is under challenge here. I think the last budget was a series of difficult decisions given the economic situation that we're in. I don't know what the right ones are. I'm not an economist. I couldn't have said how the government might have gotten the money to fill some of those holes better. But I think there will be a lot of sympathy for groups that were affected.
I don't know whether this is a different Kevin, but Kevin WhatsApps a message saying, I'm an award-winning farmer. I'm outstanding in my field.
Well done, Kevin.
Salma.
Not new. That is a very old joke.
I do have sympathy for the farmers, and I'm going to say, because I live in central London, that's what Kevin asked, right? Is there any sympathy in central London? And yeah, there is, because this is a question. First of all, it's not like Extinction Rebellion, because this is proper planned protest, and everybody in this country has a right to that. So this is not the same thing. But I do have a lot of sympathy, because what I dislike about the way that this tax has been set is that it's this idea of wealth, and the idea of categorising working people or wealthy people in a certain way, that obviously it has to sort of match up to what the Treasury's idea is, but doesn't really match up to the reality of how people work or how people feel wealth. And I think that is the ultimate unfairness. And also there has to be some understanding for the rural community, for the farming community, that what they add is more than just what they earn. Biodiversity targets, food security, food supply, all of that stuff has to be accounted for. And I think there should be some benefit to them in the inheritance tax system, because, it's not an easy job, and passing the farm down is one of the ways that actually you secure that food security.
You're absolutely right, but it comes down to cold, hard cash as well. So the return on capital, without being too technical about it, from farming is less than 1%. So if you've got 300 acres, which is, from my part of the world, that'd be a very typical to small arable farm, then that's going to take you well over the 3 million mark, but you're not making more than sort of £30,000, £40,000 a year on that. So if you have to pay 20% of that each generation, it's going to take you 40 years in order, working for someone else before you can start making a profit. Jess. It just doesn't make sense.
You are ensuring that the next generation of farmers can make nothing unless they sell off parts of their land.
And you're also ensuring that farming. I mean, a lot of big farms have already gobbled up a lot of little farms like Jerome's been talking about. That will exacerbate it.
And you have to look at the wider picture here, which is that farmers felt like they were already in a very difficult position even before the general election and a new government came in. And then they've got the changes to inheritance tax. They've got potentially an extra £50 per tonne going onto their fertiliser costs. They've got changes to the way that they can deal with supermarkets and actually trade in that space. They felt, I mean, I know that the Conservatives are totally dined out on this family farm tax thing, and they're all donning their Barber jackets and standing in front of tractors and saying we were the champions of farmers. That's not how
that's kind of unfair. I'm afraid to say that's not.
You didn't see Victoria Atkins in her lovely Great
Victoria
British
Atkins has a
jacket,
as a rural constituency.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I'm
just
not
the same as you do. Honestly, we started off this discussion about holding people to appropriate standards in public life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're saying that what the Tories were doing was just comedy or comedy value. I think that's really unfair.
I'm not saying it was comedy. What I'm saying is that the NFU and all of the farmers have been saying that they were working in a difficult environment in previous governments before the general election. So lots of farmers who have always voted Conservative made a change and they voted something different this time because they thought the situation was going to be better. Now they are standing there and going, it's got even worse. So they didn't feel listened to by the Conservatives, and now they felt like the Conservatives didn't care, and now they feel like Labour don't understand.
Did they feel listened to in the coalition?
I don't know. I wasn't there. You'd have to ask the farmers.
No, but your party was.
Yeah, it was.
And they had a minister in the department of whatever it was called at that point.
Well, whatever DEFRA.
I mean, look, every political party. I mean, look, coming from a farming background, my father always used to say, "I never vote Labour, but we always do better under a Labour government because they give us more subsidies."
And that's what the farmers thought would happen in the general election, and now they're in an even worse position than they were before.
Now, have we got time? I'm not sure we have got time for another question. Oh, let's look. Chris, I'm not going to come to you. You've called in. I'm just going to read out your question because we've literally only got 2 or 3 minutes left. It's Chris in Stubbington. He says, "What does the panel think of Liz Kendall's comments saying that some people on benefits are taking the mickey? As someone on disability benefits, I was extremely offended." Phil.
Possibly some people are, but I don't think that says that everyone is. The point of the benefit system is that people who have fallen on hard times for whatever reason have the opportunity.
We literally got 30 seconds each.
Okay, so it's not true of everybody. Probably some people are.
Salma.
I think it probably isn't the best phrase to use, but I think there are better ways of communicating the fact that we need to change our benefit system, and I don't think it was great language.
Jess?
I'm just sorry that Chris felt offended, and I'm sure that Liz Kendall didn't mean him.
Okay.
I think that there are 3 million people who are on sickness-related benefits, and a chunk of them will be more than capable of working now. About 2 million of them would be my best guess. And what we need to do is have a system which helps them get back into work. So I don't want to blame them particularly. I just want to make sure that there's a route that gets them back into work, like Mel Stride was doing, and there should be, carrot as well as stick to help them to do that.
Louis says, "Mr. Iain Dale, do you really drive a tractor? I can't imagine you with your welly boots and Barber hat on." Barber hat, such a thing. But good on you, old sport. Well, I will post later on this evening, I will post some pictures of me doing farming. They're not particularly edifying, it has to be said. Right, our fun question. Keith in Lewisham says, "It was the Super Bowl last night with Donald Trump and Taylor Swift among those who turned up, while rapper Kendrick Lamar did the halftime show, the only bit which people in this country care about. But if you could pick one artist, living or dead, to do your dream Super Bowl halftime show, who would it be?" Give you a couple of seconds to think about this. I just remember Whitney Houston sort of, I won't say screeching because that sounds awful, but absolutely belting out the Star Spangled Banner, and it's just sent shivers down your spine. So I'd have her. Salma.
Cilla Black.
Surprise, surprise.
She knew how to do entertainment, Cilla. Did you?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm jealous.
No,
that is like the only celebrity I would have been jealous of somebody else meeting. What was she like?
She was absolutely fantastic. Really.
Yeah.
Just sat on a
They'd
couch
love her.
at some charity do and just gossiped away.
There you go, female Beatle as well would do well in America.
Phil.
I'm not sure it'd be the right thing for the Super Bowl, but Johnny Cash, I've always wanted to see him, and I think he was so wise, such a beautiful voice, but also, may well have had a message for our times.
Okay. Jess?
With absolutely no shame, I'm going to say Celine Dion. I'm sorry, I just think she's fantastic.
Former Eurovision winner, did you know that?
I did not know that.
Ne partez pas sans moi. I'm full of it. Jerome?
Yes, you are. The person I'd really like to see is Freddie Mercury, wouldn't you?
Oh, that's a good
Queen.
one.
But because I am the king of middlebrow, I'd probably go with ABBA because my family just love it, and we'd all be up and dancing, wouldn't we? And we all know the words. We still know the words of some ABBA. The rest of it, I'm miming.
Right. Well, thank you all very much indeed. Now, on tomorrow's panel, we have the Labour MP and Select Committee Chair Tonia Antoniazzi, have I pronounced that right? Conservative MP Joe Robertson, the journalist and podcaster Gavin Esler, and LBC's very own Rachel Johnson. So that'll be tomorrow night from 8. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to talk about Generation Z, because, or should I say Generation Z, if I want to be down with the youth? I'm not quite sure.
I'm not there.
Anyway, apparently only 2 in 5, so 40%, are proud to be British. Now, I'm quite shocked by this, so I want to know, are you proud to be British? If you are, tell me why. If you're not, also tell me why. 0345 60 60 973 is the number to call here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.